Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for Summer Melusine, or as I like to call her, Smelu. She's a 5-star limited ruler introduced in Severin Summer Festival 2, and she's good at one thing: grinding meat. Melusine is a one-woman army, air force, and, well, not the Navy. That's Nemo's department. But the point is that she's like your own personal kill streak. So let's take a look under the hood. Fairy Pack, names are tentative, is a 3-turn arts, crit damage, and anti-chaotic buff. For your other frontliners, excluding herself, she gives them a 1k damage reduction effect, with all these lasting for 3 turns. On top of being an NP-relevant steroid, Fairy Pack helps to give your face card some bite, so make sure to keep its levels in a decent spot. The next piece of the puzzle is Blue Horizon. It has a 3-turn NP damage and 2-hit invuln for herself, but the biggest draw is a colossal 80% battery. In combination with a starting charge append, you have the option of popping this immediately for an unassisted Noble Phantasm. Whether that's a good idea is a question for later, but it is possible. What this leads into is Smelu's Noble Phantasm, Sprite Albion. This is an AoE arts attack that does super effective damage against Earth attribute enemies. It also comes with 3 turns of crit damage, preemptive for some reason. Last I checked, NPs can't crit, so unless I'm missing something, this is just for show and is functionally the same as a post-hit buff. Also, there's overcharge for 3 turns of preemptive attack. That being checked before the hit does matter. Anti-buffs? Desirable. Ramping buffs? Also desirable. Your reward for looping with Melusine is that your subsequent loops hit even harder, and if your target is still standing at the end of the process, you've accumulated quite a few crit buffs to finish them off. Helping you out on this front is Azure Sky Arms Mastery. It's a 3-turn star absorption buff that not only gives star income, but also dumps out an immediate 10 stars. If you're on water or air terrain, then you get another 20 stars per turn and a 20 star dump. It's cool, but not necessarily worth carrying around a water setter. If anything, it's probably more convenient to wing it with craft essences instead. A golden catches the carp on Castoria or a 2030, for example. Speaking of Castoria, your goal is to pretty much run 2 of her on your team, and maybe an Oberon swap if you need the extra damage. If you're missing any of them, then you'll have to slum it up with Ju Fu. Anything else is really just a tactical consideration. If your enemies have invuln, work Calamity Jane into your lineup. Helps that Melusine can assist in meeting your star requirements. If you expect to be there for a very long time, Lady Avalon and Tamamo are worth considering depending on the circumstance. For equipment, Black Rail is your first and last stop in 99% of situations. If you don't have Black Rail, then less desirable alternatives include the Loathsome Heavens Feel, the Blessed Golden Sumo, Holy Night Supper, Mark on a Smiling Face for those of you that went bankrupt for Benny Enma 4 years ago, Demonic Sun Princess, Ocean Flyer, Formal Craft, Royal Icing, and even Another Ending. Options for that other 1% include Winds of Spring for its Invuln Pierce, Arts, and NP damage combo, and the future CE Capricious, which has Defense Ignore Arts and NP damage. That one's coming in next year's Chaldea Boys event. For command codes, your options are pretty obvious. Da Vinci for NP damage, probably on your quick card, and then crit damage codes if your face cards become necessary. As for your Mystic code, Summer Street will help you preserve your huge battery by spot charging with a pair of 10%ers. I found myself relying on it quite a bit in my dealings with Smeluko. Summer Melusine is an outstanding meat grinder, one of the best in the game. What's a meat grinder, you ask? Well, there's an archetype of servant that blows away relatively low health or low threat enemies with a minimal amount of brain power required by the user. If you've ever 3-turn farmed with Space Ishtar, Summer Kama, Morgan, Summer Ibuki, or Equate among others, then you've done some meat grinding. And they are nice to have around. While you're going through an event story, farming permanent free quests, clearing pre-90++ nodes, or just going between major encounters and main story chapters, there's plenty of meat to grind in this game. You could painstakingly make a team to exploit the class compositions of these fights, or you just throw your meat grinder of choice at them and call it a day. Within this role, servants like these are often used in single core configurations, being the sole attacker that sucks up all the resources, often desiring NP5 and 120 to boot, though that isn't exclusively a single core thing. Offensively, every effect she has only benefits her. In single core, that's not necessarily an issue, and she can even menace sabers with her 3rd append, assuming you have the coins for that kind of business. But speaking of appends, Melusine has a bit of an issue stemming from her NP damage buff and the battery being the same skill. The battery is very large, which is great, but it is very lumpy. 80% isn't necessarily an amount an art servant wants to use right away. Using this restricts how many Castoria buffs you can fit in on turn 1 without wasting charge. And if you have her 2nd append, then your room to maneuver is 0. So now you're in the position of choosing between having fewer NP gain and attack buffs, but you get the NP damage, or you sack the NP damage to get those other effects earlier. In general, which option you take is going to depend on the number of enemies on screen. If there's only one target on wave 1, you pop skill 3 first. If there are 3, you parcel out Castoria skills instead. This situation can create some awkward charge shortfalls, which is where a third charger or the Summer Street Mystic code really comes in handy. The other implication of this problem is that Summer Melusine is often missing a lot of her potential damage in the early turns of a loop. You could try and raw dog loop by using everything on turn 1, but in my experience, that tends to go very poorly. So realistically speaking, you'll be sitting on a not insignificant amount of your resources, regardless of how you try to play Smelu. Compounding this issue is that, as a ruler, Melusine is forced to operate on her neutral damage. Usually not a problem when grinding meat, but what if you're fighting early waves with higher health values? It's not exactly rare for mid-boss type enemies to show up in wave 1, ones with 6-digit health values. Could you crit them? Sure, but if you have to rely on card RNG, that ain't great. And unless you're compatible with CL/SummerBB memes, needing crits at all in the early turns is a recipe for disaster and undesirable, to say the least. But this is getting close to 90++ territory, which is like the forbidden land for Melusine. If you just need a meat grinder and you miss the other options, or if you're a Fairy Knight enthusiast who's sinking 2,000 quartz into this banner anyway, she gets the job done and she's generally good in single core. You could take the blue pill, close out this video, click your heal 3 times, and say the magic words Watto Chip Melonpon to return to your Melu life. But what about that 90++? I have an NP5 Summer Melusine on my JP account, and she's not just a showpiece either. I thought to myself, well, I'm just gonna NP5 Ibuki on my NA account anyway, so let's skip her. Then when Melusine showed up, I was like, whoa, she seems so much cooler than Castoria. And look at how voluminous Barghest's hat is. I'm rolling for this hardcore. So out pops 5 Melus and everything's going great. Meat's getting ground and the trains are running on time. But in future events, I think to myself, oh, this 90++ node has a chaotic boss or an earth boss. Let's blow it away with Melusine. Disaster. Every time I try it, disaster. Charge values don't line up, my damage is insufficient, or my single target servant doesn't have enough juice. You see, Melusine being an all-consuming attacker might be fine in single core, but 90++ nodes are generally very hard to single core. It is possible if your attacker's in the right class, especially if you sacrifice efficiency for Black Grail or event damage CEs, but you want to avoid that situation when you can. Multi-core is the norm for 90++, and Melusine being a selfish AoE attacker does her absolutely no favors here. Remember that part where she has 0 offensive party buffs? Yeah, well, you really want those here. This is where the gulf between her and someone like Summer Ibuki really becomes apparent. She has a nice suite of multi-core buffs, party attack, NP gain for Summer's servants, even crit damage if it comes down to that, and targeted art/buster and cooldown reduction. To add insult to injury, she's also an anti-earth servant, and unlike Melusine who has hers at a fixed magnitude, Ibuki scales with overcharge. Sorry to say that in the current endgame paradigm, 90++, Melusine is at a tremendous disadvantage. I'll save the Schizo post compilation for another day, but there was a fellow on the UDK Barghest video who was swearing up and down that Smelu does more damage than Ibuki. I was wondering how the fuck someone comes to that conclusion. Were they assuming a double whammy, multiple turns of ramping? Only fighting berserkers? I'm not 100% on their logic, but I think I've got a pretty good suspicion. They were looking at the NP damage spreadsheet, but they missed the part where class advantage isn't factored into the calculations. This doesn't matter for Melusine or when you're comparing options within the same class. But are you often in the habit of taking berserkers in a class-neutral fights? Do you throw hands with Mash often? Is your name Lilith? Well, that's a stupid mystery solved. 1.5 times damage, boys. It matters a lot when you're comparing extra classes to berserkers. Now you might say to yourself, okay, she does less damage in farming, but what about boss fights? That's where Melusine's ramping crit damage, anti-chaotic power mod, and ruler class defenses can give her an edge over that asymmetrically assed bimbo. It's true that Melusine can take a hit much better than Ibuki, and having a 2-hit invuln is a significant improvement over face tanking. But remember that regardless of which one you pick, you're running them with Castoria, so if you don't get completely hosed by RNG, you can adjust the frequency of Castoria NPs to screen for your main attacker. Sure, hits can go through and Ibuki is much worse off when this does happen, but you can buy yourself several turns of time before this becomes likely. One other issue with the boss fight hypothesis is that Melusine really doesn't have anything to deal with mechanics bullshit. Even Ibuki can purge defensive buffs, despite being also sparse in the non-damage utility department. Melusine, on the other hand, is 100% fire NP and then crit. Rip and tear until it's done. So things like evades, invulns, high defenses, these all need to be handled externally, which complicates your team building and it'll leave you wondering, why didn't I just use a specialist in the first place? In other words, she doesn't deal with gimmicks all too well, which is something you typically want in your boss killer. Summer Melusine is a generally useful servant that's stuck competing in an extremely crowded niche. Her ability to grind meat isn't in dispute, and she can threaten more resilient enemies with powerful crits and repeated NPs. However, the way she does this makes her broadly unsuitable for 90++ team building and a toss-up in boss fights, relegating her to just meat grinding for the most part. While she's one of the best at that specific task, that's not a great reason to get a servant that only functions in this role, especially when there are alternatives with multi-core viability. And if you already have a high investment meat grinder, I don't think the incremental gain in performance is really worth the expense, whether in terms of money or the opportunity cost. Remember that Smelu is on the banner opposite Summer Castoria, who, by contrast, is a meta-warping and cutting-edge servant. So it's really hard for me to recommend her, despite the fact that she's good in a vacuum. If you plan to carry on regardless, Summer Melusine does get 2 additional banners after Servant Summer Festival 2 ends. The first of these is in July of 2026, which runs the same banners again. The second will be in January 2027. This is during the Ruler Omni banners, and she shows up alongside Summer Martha. Speaking of 2027, one recent news I found for Melusine is in the 4th Ordeal Call, Trinity Metatronius. You fight a shitload of ruler trash mobs, and Meluko gets a substantial power mod on account of her class. Pretty much an ideal meat grinding scenario for someone like her. That's something, I guess. Also, Lilith gets double whammied, technically, but I don't think you'll be using Melusine for that fight. Just a hunch. So do you plan to go deep for Summer Melusine? Do you think she deserved to be in the top 10 servants for this year? I didn't, but what do I know? I've only had to use the fucker for 2 years. I stream every weekend at twitch.tv/Finotaisen, 3 p.m. Pacific time. This week you can expect a combination of Nikkei Summer rolls on Friday, Melusine rolls on Saturday, and the dreadful finale, NP5 Zerctoria on Sunday. It's gonna suck. For me at least. I can imagine you guys will get a kick out of it. See you there.